10 years ago, Commander Derek Fry stood in the sweltering hangar on Lumria, sweat dripping down his brow as he wrestled with the ancient propulsion system of a forgotten Earth transport vessel. The Galactic Confederation had assured humanity that cooperation with the Lumrians would be mutually beneficial. Their advanced technology for Earth's raw determination and mechanical ingenuity. Yet here Derek was elbow-deep in alien metal, doing what he did best, fixing things no one else bothered to understand. The hangar was mostly empty, save for the scattered tools and half-dismantled equipment Derek had appropriated for his project. The Lumrians, with their lavender skin and silver-white hair, preferred to automate such menial tasks. But Derek believed in the value of hands-on work, especially when it came to understanding the nuances of machinery that might one day save lives. He was so absorbed in his work that he barely noticed the soft footsteps approaching behind him. "What are you doing?" The voice was high-pitched, curious, and distinctly childish. Derek glanced over his shoulder to find a Lumrian girl, no more than 8 or 9 by human standards, peering at him with wide, iridescent eyes. Her skin was the palest shade of lavender, and her silver hair was braided in the traditional style of young Lumrians. She was dressed in the simple tunics that children wore, and she clutched a small, glowing toy in one hand. "I'm fixing this old transport," Derek explained, turning back to his work. He was used to Lumrian children being curious about Earth customs, but usually they were accompanied by adults. "Why don't you use the auto repair matrix?" she asked, stepping closer. "My father says that's what it's for." Derek suppressed a smile. "Where I come from, we believe in understanding how things work before we let machines do all the thinking." The girl considered this, her head tilted. "I'm Tira," she announced. "I'm Derek." She watched him work in silence for several minutes, and Derek found himself explaining each step to her as he went. She was remarkably intelligent, grasping concepts quickly and asking insightful questions. "Do all humans fix things with their hands?" Tira asked eventually. "Most of us try," Derek replied. "It's part of who we are." She nodded solemnly. "When I grow up, I want to marry a human. Someone like you." Derek nearly dropped his tool. He turned to look at her, caught between amusement and bewilderment. Such direct declarations were common among Lumrian children, who hadn't yet learned the art of subtlety that their elders practiced. "Well," he said, playing along, "when you're all grown up and beautiful, I promise I'll marry you." Tira's face lit up with pure joy. "Really? You promise?" "Promise," Derek confirmed, already turning back to his work. He'd be off Lumria by the end of the month, and this would be just another amusing memory to share with his crew. "I'll remember," Tira said seriously. "I'll memorize your name and everything. Derek Fry, Commander, Earth Expedition Force." She repeated it several times, committing it to memory with the intensity only children possess when they believe they've discovered something magical. Derek chuckled, not realizing that to a Lumrian child, such promises were sacred bonds that shaped destinies. As the sun set over Lumria, bathing the crystalline spires in golden light, Derek finished his work and began cleaning up. Tira watched him attentively, asking questions about Earth customs and family structures. By the time he was ready to leave, Derek felt oddly charmed by her enthusiasm. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked as he gathered his tools. "Sure, kid," Derek replied. "If you promise not to distract me too much." "I promise," she said eagerly, then looked thoughtful. "And you already promised to marry me when I grow up." Derek laughed again. "Right. See you tomorrow, Tira." As he walked out of the hangar, Derek felt the warm satisfaction of a day well spent. He'd made progress on the transport, learned something new about Lumrian metallurgy, and apparently gained himself a small admirer. What he didn't know was that somewhere in the shadows of the hangar, a figure in traditional Lumrian robes had been watching the exchange with great interest. What he also didn't know was that in Lumrian culture, a promise made to a child, especially regarding future bonds, was considered absolutely inviolable. The days that followed brought more visits from Tira. She would appear in the hangar each afternoon, sometimes bringing snacks from her home, other times just her endless curiosity. Derek found himself looking forward to her visits. Her her questions pushing him to articulate his knowledge in new ways. Why do humans have so many different skin colors? Tira asked one day. We come from different regions of our planet, Derek explained. Different climates, different evolutionary paths. It makes us diverse. I like that, Tira decided. Lumrians are all the same color. Sometimes it's nice when everyone looks alike, but I think I'd like to see more variety. Such conversations became commonplace, and Derek began to appreciate the innocence with which she viewed the universe. Through her eyes, the complex relationships between the Galactic Confederation's member species seemed simple matters of friendship and cooperation. As his departure date approached, Derek found himself growing melancholy. He'd missed these afternoon conversations, the way Tira's face lit up when she understood a new concept, her unwavering faith in his abilities. On his last day on Lumria, Tira arrived earlier than usual, her arms full of flowers, delicate, luminescent blooms that grew only on her world. These are for you, she said, thrusting them at him. To remember me by. Derek accepted them, touched despite himself. I won't forget you, Tira. And you won't forget your promise? The way she asked it, so earnestly, made Derek pause. He knelt down to her level. I promise I won't forget any part of our time together. Satisfied, Tira nodded. Then I'll see you again when I'm grown up. Maybe you will, Derek said gently, not having the heart to explain how vast the galaxy was, how unlikely their paths were to cross again. That evening, as Derek boarded the transport ship that would take him to his next assignment, he carried the flowers Tira had given him. They would wilt and die before he reached his destination, but he kept them anyway, pressing one between the pages of his duty log. And somewhere on Lumria, a young girl stood at her window, looking up at the stars and whispering a name she had memorized. Derek Fry, Commander, Earth Expedition Force. 10 years would pass before their paths crossed again. 10 years that would change them both in ways neither could have imagined. Derek Fry stood in the command center of Outpost Sigma, a much larger installation than the one he'd visited a decade earlier. At 42, he was no longer the young commander who'd fixed ships by hand and made careless promises to children. His hair had begun to gray at the temples, and the weight of responsibility had etched fine lines around his eyes. A decade had seen him rise through the ranks to become the post commander, responsible for overseeing all Earth operations on Lumria. The political landscape had grown more complex in that time, with various factions within the Galactic Confederation lobbying for different approaches to interspecies relations. Derek had returned to Lumria just 2 months ago, having accepted a 3-year posting to solidify the alliance between Earth and the Lumrian people. The role came with privileges and burdens alike, attending council meetings, managing diplomatic relations, overseeing technological exchanges. On this particular morning, Derek was reviewing supply requisitions when his aide, Lieutenant Parker, burst into his office looking flustered. Sir, there's a situation in Hangar 7. What kind of situation? Derek asked, already reaching for his jacket. A visitor, sir. A Lumrian claiming to have a personal matter to discuss with you. Frowning, Derek followed Parker through the corridors. Hangar 7 hadn't changed much. It still smelled of metal and lubricants, still echoed with the sound of maintenance work. As they entered, Derek saw a figure standing near the old transport he'd once worked on, which still sat in the corner like a museum piece. The Lumrian turned at their approach, and Derek stopped dead in his tracks. She was stunning. Her lavender skin glowed with health. Her silver-white hair fell in elegant waves past her shoulders, and her eyes held an intensity that made his breath catch. She wore the formal robes of a Lumrian adult, richly embroidered with the symbols of her family house. Commander Derek Fry, she said, and her voice was melodious, confident. You probably don't recognize me. Something in her tone, in the shape of her features, stirred a memory. But before he could grasp it, she continued. I'm Tira. Tira el Sana. You promised to marry me when I grew up. The words hit Derek like a physical blow. He stared at her, his mind racing through memories he'd thought long buried. The curious child, the innocent conversations, the careless promise made to amuse. Tira, he managed, his voice rough with shock. Yes. She stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. I've waited 10 years. I've come to remind you of your promise. Behind him, Lieutenant Parker cleared his throat nervously. Sir, should I? Leave us, Derek said without turning. But inform Admiral Kensington that I may need him on a diplomatic matter. Parker hesitated only a moment before hurrying out. Derek took the opportunity to compose himself, drawing on his years of training to maintain his professional demeanor. Tira, when I made that promise, you were a child. I was joking. In Lumrian culture, she interrupted, promises made to children are sacred, especially promises of future bonds. Derek ran a hand through his hair, a habit he developed when stressed. I didn't know that then, but you know now. Her tone wasn't accusatory, merely factual. The High Council was informed of your promise years ago. They've been waiting to see if you're a man of honor. The High Council knows. This was worse than he'd realized. My family is influential in matters of tradition and honor, Tira explained. When I told them about your promise, they took it very seriously. They've been watching, waiting to see if humans can be trusted to keep their word. Derek's mind raced through the implications. If he dishonored this promise, it could damage Earth's relationship with the Lumrians. But if he acknowledged it, what would that mean for his career, his life? What exactly are you asking of me? He asked carefully. I'm asking you to enter the traditional courtship period, Tira said. By our customs, you must spend time with me, meet my family, participate in our rituals. Only then can the promise be fulfilled or honorably dissolved. And if I refuse? For the first time, her composure wavered slightly. The council would see it as a grave insult. It might complicate things between our people. Derek closed his eyes, processing the situation. When he opened them, Tira was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You've changed, he observed. I've grown up, she replied simply. That's what you promised to wait for. Within hours, the situation had exploded into a diplomatic incident. Admiral Kensington, Derek's superior, had received communications from the Lumrian High Council requesting acknowledgement of the traditional courtship period. The Earth Diplomatic Corps was in an uproar, unsure how to handle a situation that straddled personal and political boundaries. You can't seriously be considering this, Kensington said during an emergency meeting. Your primary duty is to maintain relations between our species, not to honor some childhood promise. With respect, sir, Derek responded, it seems that maintaining relations requires me to honor this promise. The Lumrians don't distinguish between personal and political honor in matters like this. Ambassador Chun, the senior Earth diplomat on Lumria, intervened. There's more at stake here than Derek's personal situation. We have intelligence suggesting that the Purist Covenant, a faction that opposes any mixing of Lumrian and human cultures, would like nothing more than an excuse to create friction between our peoples. Derek absorbed this information grimly. What about Tira? She seems to believe in this promise. She's not just any Lumrian citizen, Chin explained. Her father, Master Engineer Kalen Elshana, is one of the most respected figures in Lumrian society. Her views on human-Lumrian cooperation could significantly influence public opinion. The next day, Derek found himself in the formal gardens of the Lumrian Cultural Center, participating in the first ritual of the courtship period. Tira wore ceremonial robes that shimmered with embedded lights, and she moved with a grace that spoke of years of training in traditional arts. The ritual itself was complex, involving the sharing of family histories, the exchange of symbolic gifts, and pledges of respect between families. Derek felt awkward, stumbling over unfamiliar phrases and customs, but Tira guided him patiently. You've learned much about our language, she observed during a break in the ceremonies. I've had 10 years, Derek replied, and now I'm apparently motivated. She smiled, and for a moment, he saw the child he'd once known in her eyes. I learned much about humans, too. Your languages, your customs, your biology. I wanted to be ready. For what? For this. For you. She hesitated, then added, I know this must seem strange to you, but in our culture, promises shape destinies. I believed in this promise my entire life. Derek studied her, seeing the conviction in her features. I feel like I should apologize for every careless word I ever spoke. No, she said firmly. Words have power. You gave me something to hope for, to strive toward. Even if, she trailed off. Even if what? Even if you don't choose to fulfill the promise, this time has value. Our peoples need to understand each other better. Perhaps that's why the universe brought us together. Over the following weeks, Derek found himself drawn into Tira's world. He met her family, her stern but fair father, who evaluated him with the critical eye of an engineer examining a complex mechanism, her gentle mother, who welcomed him with traditional hospitality, her younger siblings, who regarded him with open curiosity. He participated in more rituals, each designed to test compatibility and understanding between potential mates. Some focused on intellectual harmony, others on practical skills, and still others on family values and life goals. During these rituals, Derek discovered that Tira was brilliant, her mind as sharp as the precision instruments her father crafted. She held degrees in xenobiology and comparative cultures, and she spoke with passion about bridging gaps between species. I've been preparing for this role since I was a child, she admitted one evening as they shared a meal in the traditional style, seated on cushions around a low table. Not just for you specifically, but for being a bridge between our peoples. And if I'm not the right person for that role? Derek asked. Then perhaps the universe will provide another opportunity, she said pragmatically. But I believe there's a reason our paths crossed as they did. Children often see truths that adults overlook. As days turned into weeks, Derek found himself genuinely enjoying Tira's company. She challenged him intellectually, made him laugh with her observations about human quirks, and showed him aspects of Lumrian culture he'd never experienced in his official capacity. But the situation was complicated by troubling reports. The Purist Covenant, led by a charismatic figure named Counselor Valen, was gaining support among certain segments of Lumrian society. Their message was simple but potent. Intermingling of species would dilute the purity of Lumrian heritage. They're using our courtship as propaganda, Derek mentioned during one of their meetings. Valen claims we're an example of cultural contamination. Tira's expression darkened. Valen speaks for a vocal minority. Most Lumrians support cooperation with other species, but fear can spread quickly. Derek was about to respond when his communicator buzzed urgently. The message was brief but critical. Report to command immediately. Project Horizon compromised. Project Horizon was the joint venture developing advanced propulsion technology that would benefit both species. If it had been compromised, the scene at the main laboratory was chaos. Security personnel swarmed the facility. Medical teams tended to the injured, and Chief Engineer Williams was coordinating damage control efforts. What happened? Derek demanded. Sabotage, Williams replied grimly. Someone accessed the main power relay and overloaded the containment system. 3 of our best engineers are in critical condition. Derek's mind raced. Security footage? Corrupted. Whoever did this knew our systems. As Derek assessed the damage, whispers began circulating among the witnesses. Someone had seen him and Tira near the facility the previous evening. Someone else remembered them discussing technical specifications at a public event. By midday, the whispers had grown into accusations. Counselor Valen appeared on the public news channels, suggesting that the sabotage was connected to dangerous alliances between species and pointing to Derek and Tira's courtship as a symbol of such risks. Derek was summoned before an emergency session of the Joint Command Council. The atmosphere was tense, with both Earth and Lumrian officials demanding answers. Commander Fry, Admiral Kensington began formally. Can you account for your whereabouts during the time of the sabotage? I was in my quarters, reviewing technical specifications for tomorrow's courtship ritual, Derek replied. Alone. And Miss Shana? I don't know. We had dinner together earlier, but we separated around 2,200 hours. The questioning continued, probing every aspect of his relationship with Tira, every detail of their courtship. Derek maintained his composure, but the implications were clear. He and Tira were suspects in a crime that could derail the entire cooperation between their species. After the session, Tira found him in his office. She looked pale, but determined. "They're questioning my family now," she said. "Valen is demanding that the courtship be suspended pending investigation." "He's found his weapon," Derek said bitterly. "If we continue the courtship, they'll claim we're prioritizing personal interests over security. If we stop, they'll claim we're running from guilt." "There's something else," Tira said hesitantly. "Something I haven't told you." Derek looked at her sharply. "What?" "I'm pregnant." The words hit Derek with the force of a plasma blast. He groped for his chair, sinking into it as the implications cascaded through his mind. How is that? How is that possible? Our species aren't supposed to be genetically compatible, Tira finished. The scientists said it was theoretically possible, but the probability was infinitesimal. Yet here we are. Derek's mind raced. They've been intimate twice during the courtship rituals, moments of genuine connection that had surprised them both. Each time, they've been assured by medical experts that conception was impossible. "How long have you known?" "I suspected for weeks. I confirmed it yesterday morning." She sat across from him, reaching for his hand. "I know this complicates everything." "Complicates?" Derek laughed harshly. "This gives Valen exactly what he needs. A hybrid child. It's his worst nightmare come to life." As if summoned by the thought, Derek's communicator chimed with an emergency alert. A public gathering had been called at the Central Plaza. Valen was addressing the crowd. They accessed the live feed on Derek's office screen. Valen stood before a massive audience, his lavender skin flushed with passion, his traditional robes marking him as a keeper of ancient customs. "The sabotage of Project Horizon isn't an isolated incident," Valen declared. "It's a symptom of a deeper problem. Our alliance with humanity was meant to be beneficial, not dilution of our identity. And now we have living proof of this danger. A hybrid abomination growing in the womb of one of our own." The crowd murmured, some in agreement, others in shock. Valen continued. "Tira Shana, by allowing herself to bear a human child, has violated the sacred trust of our genetic heritage. This cannot stand." Derek looked at Tira, seeing the fear in her eyes for the first time. "How does he know?" "My medical scanners must have been monitored," she whispered. "He's been planning this." Within hours, the situation spiraled. The High Council called an emergency session to debate the validity of human Lumrian unions. Earth Command ordered Derek to stand down from his position pending investigation. And somewhere in the chaos, Tira disappeared. Derek's search for her began in the traditional haunts, her family home, the cultural centers, the meditation gardens where she often sought peace. But at each location, he found only concerned relatives and friends who hadn't seen her since the broadcast. "Sir," Lieutenant Parker reported, "there's been activity at the old mining complex in the Crystalline Mountains. Our surveillance detected movement in structures that were supposed to be abandoned." Derek felt a chill. The Crystalline Mountains were a perfect location for the Purist Covenant to establish a base. Remote, difficult to monitor, with natural barriers that would defeat most scanning equipment. "Assemble a team," Derek ordered. "I'm going after her." "Sir, Admiral Kensington ordered you to stand down." "The Admiral isn't here," Derek cut in. "And I'm not leaving Tira in the hands of extremists who view our child as an abomination." Derek's team consisted of 5 trusted officers, 3 human, 2 Lumrian. The Lumrians were especially crucial. Their understanding of traditional customs might help navigate any cultural defenses the purists might employ. The old mining complex was as treacherous as expected. Ancient tunnels wound through the crystalline mountains like arteries, some large enough for vehicles, others barely passable. The team advanced cautiously, using portable sensors to map the passages ahead. 6 levels down, they encountered the first guards. The Lumrian security specialist, Kessier Vin, engaged them in traditional combat, a stylized form of engagement that would incapacitate without killing, respecting the Lumrian prohibition against taking life. "They're using stun fields," Kessa reported after neutralizing 3 guards. "This confirms they're not violent extremists. They follow the old traditions even in rebellion." The distinction was crucial. It meant they wouldn't harm Tira, but it also meant their equipment would be defensive rather than destructive. They pressed deeper into the complex, following heat signatures and power consumption patterns. 2 more guard posts fell to their advance before they reached the central chamber. Tira sat in a curved chair that resembled ancient Lumrian thrones, surrounded by monitoring equipment that looked ominously medical. Counselor Valen stood nearby, along with several robed figures Derek assumed were purist leaders. "Commander Fry," Valen said, his voice carrying the resonance of formal pronouncement. "You arrived just in time to witness the restoration of purity." "Let her go, Valen," Derek demanded. "Whatever your beliefs, holding someone against their will violates every Lumrian principle." "Does it?" Valen gestured to the equipment. "This device doesn't harm. It merely corrects. It will remove the human genetic material from her child, restoring the infant to its pure Lumrian state." "You can't be serious," Derek breathed, horror replacing his anger. "You'd alter an unborn child's genetics?" "The child was never meant to exist," Valen replied. "We're simply undoing an accident of biology." Tira spoke for the first time since Derek's arrival. "The procedure could kill the child. Or me. Or both. They haven't tested it properly. But the alternative," Valen began. "The alternative is accepting that evolution sometimes creates unexpected possibilities," Derek interrupted. "Our child, yes, our child, could be the first of a new bridge between our species. Or they could simply be a unique individual, valuable for their own." "Sake." Valen's expression hardened. "You would dilute the ancient purity of Lumria for one child." "I would protect life," Derek responded. "Isn't that the foundation of all Lumrian philosophy?" The debate might have continued, but Tira made her move. With a grace that spoke of traditional training, she swept her leg around the chair's base, interfering with the equipment's sensor array. Sparks flew from the medical monitors. "Now!" Derek shouted, and his team surged forward. The next minutes were a blur of action. Stun fields crackled through the air. Guards attempted to restrain the team, while Valen shouted orders. Tira fought alongside them, her movements fluid and precise. But numbers were against them. For every guard they incapacitated, 2 more seemed to take their place. Derek found himself back-to-back with Tira, both of them breathing hard as their opponent circled. "The device," Tira gasped. "If we destroy it, they have no leverage." Derek understood immediately. The purification device was their only means of attempting the procedure. Without it, the purists would have to negotiate. "Cover me," he ordered, then sprinted for the central console. Plasma fire sizzled past him as guards tried to stop his approach. He slid the last few meters, using the chair as cover as he examined the controls. The device was protected by multiple authentication protocols, designed to prevent exactly this kind of sabotage. But Derek's years of field engineering had taught him that sophisticated doesn't always mean resilient. He began manually overriding systems, creating feedback loops that would cause the machine to essentially fight itself. Warning lights flared. Emergency protocols engaged. "It's going to overload," he warned the team. "Fall back." They retreated as the device began to emit high-pitched whines of protest. Valen rushed forward, trying to override Derek's sabotage, but he was too late. The purification device collapsed in on itself with a controlled implosion that damaged nothing else in the chamber. In the aftermath, with the device destroyed and reinforcements from the main outpost arriving, the situation de-escalated. Valen and his followers surrendered peacefully, respecting the traditional codes even in defeat. "We will face judgment," Valen said to Derek as guards led him away. "As will you. The council will decide whether your actions preserved life or endangered our future." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of investigations, debates, and diplomatic negotiations. Derek faced a board of inquiry for disobeying orders, but was ultimately commended for his actions in protecting an innocent and preventing a diplomatic disaster. The Purist Covenant was officially censured by the High Council, though not banned. Their right to voice concerns was protected by Lumrian law, but their extremist actions were condemned. Most importantly, Tira's pregnancy became a symbol of possibility rather than threat. Medical experts from both species collaborated to monitor her health and the child's development, documenting the first successful human-Lumrian hybrid pregnancy. 6 months later, Derek and Tira stood in a garden on Earth. The location was Colorado, where Derek had been raised, in a small town surrounded by mountains that reminded Tira slightly of home. The ceremony combined traditions from both cultures. Human guests sat beside Lumrian dignitaries. Admiral Kensington, who had privately supported Derek throughout the ordeal, served as his best man. Tira's family, including her father who had eventually accepted the union, occupied positions of honor. Master Engineer Kalen Elshana performed the traditional Lumrian blessing. Ambassador Chen officiated the human vows. The rings they exchanged were crafted from metals native to both their worlds, forged together in a symbolic joining. When the ceremony concluded, Derek and Tira stood together as a breeze carried the scent of earth flowers and Lumrian luminescent blooms that had been specially imported for the occasion. "I have something to tell you," Tira said, her hand resting on her visibly pregnant belly. "What's that?" The doctors confirmed it. "The baby is healthy. All indicators are normal. And," she smiled, "they say she's showing signs of being remarkably adaptable to various environments." "She?" "Yes. The traditional Lumrian scan revealed it yesterday. I've been waiting for today to tell you." Derek placed his hand over hers, feeling their daughter move. "A girl. I think I once knew a little girl who promised to marry me when she grew up." Tira laughed, the sound carrying across the garden. "And I think I know a man who kept his promise, even when it seemed impossible." Around them, their guests, human and Lumrian alike, celebrated the union that proved promises made in innocence could grow into bonds that spanned stars. 5 years later, as Derek watched their daughter chase Lumrian light moths through the gardens of their home inn, the ambassador's quarter of Lumria, he reflected on the journey that had brought them here. Little Kira had her mother's lavender skin and her father's curiosity, her grandmother's gentleness, and her grandfather's analytical mind. She was already something of a celebrity in both cultures, the first of what everyone hoped would be many bridges between species. But to Derek and Tira, she was simply their daughter, equally at home, speaking English or Lumrian, equally fascinated by human engines and Lumrian energy matrices. "Watch," Kira called out, drawing her parents' attention. She spread her small arms, and light moths gathered around her, a gift from the Lumrian genetic heritage that allowed her to interact with the planet's native bioluminescent life. "Beautiful," Tira murmured, leaning into Derek's embrace. "Just like her mother," Derek replied, then added more seriously, "I've been thinking about that conversation we had all those years ago, when I made the promise that changed everything." "What about it?" "I used to think it was random chance that led me to that hangar that made me say those words to you. But now I wonder if there was something else at work, something that saw the possibility of what we could become." Tira was quiet for a moment, watching their daughter dance with the moths. "Perhaps the universe doesn't deal in coincidence as much as we think. Perhaps promises have power we don't fully understand. Or perhaps," Derek suggested, pulling her closer, "promises are just the beginning of the best stories." As the twin moons of Lumria rose in the evening sky, casting their gentle light over a family that proved love and understanding could bridge any divide, Derek realized that the promise he'd made to a child had indeed been kept. Not just in the way either of them had imagined, but in the creation of something entirely new. Their story became legend in both cultures. The human who honored a childhood promise, the Lumrian who believed in possibility, and their daughter who became living proof that the best promises are those that grow beyond their original scope, evolving into something greater than anyone could have foreseen. And somewhere in the vastness of the Galactic Confederation, other species watch with interest, wondering what other bridges might be built, what other promises might lead to unexpected unity among the stars.